my interest in careers has been quite long-standing. I studied languages at university. Wanted to be a diplomat at some point, but again, I'm not really sure how serious I was about that. But latterly, I ended up going back to university in my late 20s, studying things like psychotherapy, career coaching. Via work, I've studied things like psychometrics and job evaluation. So psychometrics obviously being how our independent personalities drive us towards particular careers or professions. But before all this, I'd done some work in advertising. When I came into recruitment and talent, that was with the security service, so as part of the government. I did some consulting with Hayes, where I again worked across the third sector. And then for the last 10 years prior to Investigo, I was in-house, so effectively instead of being a consultant working with lots of different brands, I was working on the inside of organisations, recruiting out to in. So I was with the Science Museum Group across the UK. I was with the CIPD, which is the chartered body for HR. I was with London Business School, which obviously had a strong education element. And then most recently, I was with the Royal Household, which obviously is part of the cultural heritage type sector. So like I say, I was in-house for the last 10 years prior to Investigo. I've been back on this side of the fence for the last 3 years. And I think it just gives me quite a rounded perspective on both how organisations hire, but also how agencies and more commercial entities operate in this space as well. So now I work with leaders across the third sector on senior level consulting or executive search roles. My clients are a combination of CEOs, COOs or directors who have oversight of these organisations. In terms of what I mean by the third sector, so someone mentioned it earlier in their questions, but when I talk to people about this, because we're housed underneath the umbrella of public sector, I always refer to the third sector as anything that could be either charities and NGOs, education or cultural heritage, the arts. There's also another element which is around research and policy, so that might be a chartered institute or a membership space, or it could be more of a think tank or research centre. So hopefully that's helpful. In terms of the kinds of roles that we recruit for at Investigo, it's mainly corporate roles and consulting services. So corporate would be HR, finance, technology, procurement type roles. We also do lots of consulting where obviously and I'll talk about this a bit more, but with consulting engagements, it almost doesn't matter what the profession or the sector is because we'll build a team to deliver that. In terms of the organisations I work with, it can be anything from a tiny one-person charity to a big international like an Amnesty or a WaterAid, someone like that. And I also spend a lot of my time helping people transition from permanent roles to interim and portfolio careers. So hopefully that you'll get some value from that as well. Everything I talk about here will be informed by my work with third sector organisations, but lots of this is quite relevant to other environments. So just bear that in mind, that this won't specifically all be relevant to third sector or third sector alone. So hopefully it's helpful in other ways as well. So third sector, as I mentioned earlier, it's a combination of charities and NGOs, education environments, and then there's a piece in the middle which is a combination of cultural sector and research sector. So that's how we kind of delineate within Investigo. But what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about changes in hiring in the sector. I'm also going to talk about your value proposition and what you can do to position yourselves more effectively. I'll talk about how to use agencies like us and how to get the best from us as an applicant or a candidate. And then I'll talk a bit about where I think we're headed and additional tips that might help. So like I say, first thing I think is worth talking about is changes in the sector. And then I'll pause for some questions after this because there's a lot of information here. But I think it's important to start by setting the scene and give you an insight into how the employment market in the third sector is changing and how organisations are now hiring. So the current state of play in the third sector is that it's still a job-led market, which means there are more candidates and workers available who want a new job in comparison to how many roles there are. That's the case for many markets, and it normally is a bit of an up and down wax and wane effect. We obviously have candidate-led markets every now and then, so nursing has been candidate-led for a while now. I remember back in 2015-ish when engineers were so highly prized that, agencies like us, we could have We didn't do an engineering, but the agency I worked for did. And we would find an engineer in the morning, and by the afternoon we would have 6 or 7 interviews lined up for them because so many organisations needed to hire them. But generally speaking, traditionally, roles have been advertised by organisations, and then people have made applications to those jobs, and then the organisation themselves has filtered them and then assessed the candidates they want to take forward. At the moment, when they're advertising roles, they're receiving literally hundreds of applications, as you'll probably know, because you'll probably see that on LinkedIn. Sometimes you go to a job and you see that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of applications already in, which can be misleading as well. We'll talk about that later. But that's just the backdrop of what we're talking about. So that's kind of the state of play. And like I say, the top level market and the bit that we see as candidates has been that roles are advertised, we apply for them, and then we hopefully get taken forward. There is a hidden jobs market, and you've probably all heard about that at some point. So effectively that is organisations hiring without advertising, and they might use people like us to find people. They might hire through their own networks. So this was already happening, but it was restricted a bit by governance and fairness of process and diligence across our sector. But some elements of that are now changing. So organisations, I think, in the third sector are more fast-paced and agile. They have to be, and that's leading to more agility in how they hire. I think there's a wider kind of cross-sector thing which is happening, which is the death of permanent roles. Permanent roles are becoming more and more scarce relative to the number of people who would ordinarily do them. And I think we're seeing this shift to quite flexible consulting and portfolio and freelance work that wasn't the case maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but is becoming more and more the case now. There's also a rise of fractional. So I think, Lynn, you mentioned something around fractional interim work. We're definitely seeing that. We're seeing that model become more and more prevalent. And I think that's really good for the market in the sense that organisations get access to top talent, whereas normally they might not have been able to afford that. It's also good for the worker because you might have someone who can do lots of different engagements and have this quite varied and interesting career. It might not necessarily be good for some people because it means that in theory more opportunities are being taken by a smaller number of people. But again, that's something that the market will probably calibrate. And I think we're also seeing this. We're seeing this model emerge, which has probably been emerging in our world for the last 15 years or so. But this, I don't know how many of you have heard of statements of work. You might have come across them in your worlds. But when we put together big statements of work, effectively it's a contracting of services for our clients. And what it tends to mean is that instead of clients coming to us and paying for people and people's time, they'll come to us and they'll give us the whole project, and we will effectively manage the project on our side. How it applies to you is that people are paid for their value and their delivery as opposed to their time. And that's a really, really good thing, I think, for most people. Certainly for the buying side, they get a guarantee of what's actually being delivered. But it is a slightly different model. I'm going to talk a bit more about that because I think it has probably informed how fractional work and how portfolio work now operates. And then finally, I'm not going to get bogged down too much in AI, but it is reality we can't really ignore. I think there are good and bad things to what AI might mean for us, not just in the third sector, but the wider employment and jobs market. Obviously, some people think it's not necessarily a good thing because there might be fewer roles available. Organisations can do more with less. They might need fewer people. Technology will become cheaper, so it will take away the things that you can do. But again, some people are more optimistic and they think that we can do more as individuals, so therefore there will be more opportunities for us, or we'll have more salary leverage, or in general there will be more from a bigger pot to choose from. So my only real advice around AI is just to become conversant. You don't need to know everything, but you do need to be able to use these tools and understand what they are. So I think it's growing, and I think it's because the mechanisms that we used to use to sift through applications are falling apart a bit. So organisations now are, like I said, they're advertising roles and they're getting 600 or 700 applications. And lots of those are generated, by the way, by AI tools. So candidates are using AI tools to build lots and lots of applications very, very quickly. Organizations have responded by building AI tools to sift them. So you've got robots talking to robots on each side, and that is, I think we can all accept that's not really an ideal state of play, and it doesn't really help either side. So I think organizations now, when they think about advertising a role, they're aware of the pain and the effort and the time costs to advertising a role, to sifting hundreds of applications, to interviewing and assessing. And I think for that reason, if they can find a cheaper, quicker solution, that will in theory turn their head. So I personally think, from what I see, I think the hidden jobs market is going to grow. And I think there's also going to be more hiring from within small communities like this kind of thing.
So just to add on to that, tell everyone to join Brave Starts.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'll talk about this soon, but I think communities are going to become they're already obviously a big part of what we do. But I think it's just going to be a given that human beings will naturally gravitate towards these kinds of communities, because they genuinely do give you something that you don't really get given it otherwise in another format throughout your working life. So yeah, big advocate of what Brave Starts are doing, obviously. I wouldn't necessarily say you have to be. Generally
Yeah.
speaking, so when I've worked with charities who are looking for trustees, they normally start with quite a short
Mm.
or a short and sharp requirements list of what they want this trustee to do, what their availability should be, how aligned they should be with the mission. So I think naturally it's always going to help you if you're known to someone who's
Yeah.
potentially going to engage your services. But I don't think by any means that not being known to an organisation should prohibit you from going forward for something. It might just be the onus might be more on you to position yourself slightly differently
Yeah.
to make up that disadvantage, if there is one. To a certain extent, definitely. I think generally speaking, the sector and the areas that I look after have been really badly hit, probably since COVID. So you think about what we've had since 2020. We've had COVID, cost of living, three world wars. We've had new prime minister. We've had new president in the US. We've had all these things which have kind of shunted or depressed the market in some respects. So that's definitely comes into it. But I think what I was referring to is I think it's more of a broad statement on where I think organisations are going. And I think it's driven in part by the fact that individuals can do more. So before you might have had big teams doing marketing, finance, HR, technology, whatever it might have been. I think the future seems to be that more and more people are adding more strings to their bow because technology is allowing them to be. If you think about, as an interim consultant, you might have had an accountant before. Now people use things like QuickBooks. So technology is coming in, which is enabling people to be more and more one-man bands. And I also think there's a wider efficiency piece for organisations where it doesn't always make sense for them to have a large number of permanent staff. I think more and more they might start rolling people on to do specific pieces of work and then rolling them off while someone else comes in and does the next phase of work or whatever it might be. And again, that's more of a prediction from me than something I'm seeing happening day in, day out. But it does feel like that's where the trend is headed. And again, I'll run through this quite quickly, but it's worth just giving you a better understanding of how to improve your value proposition to entice third sector clients or to get them to buy from you or engage you. I think, like as I've said, there have been big changes in what these organisations want and how they engage those services. So, firstly, I think it's more about positioning who you are and what you can do. I always use the concept of products. So, what are the products? What are the kind of clusters of skills or activities that you're really good at? What is it that you bring to organisations, and what problems do you solve? Because effectively, those products become your shop window. And it might be a combination of your skills and experience. It might be your achievements, but this is your currency effectively. So people won't buy qualifications or bland statements. They'll buy the packaging of these products as something that's really going to help them. I think quantifiables and evidence, that's something that I think lots of people fall foul of when they're either pitching to clients or they're doing their CV. I think anytime you can quantify what you've done, it really helps relativize and contextualize it for organizations and helps them apply it to themselves and see how you might help them. So, you know, as a really crude example, just saying I've made some cost savings in an organization is fine. But if you can say, you know, I reduced our overheads by £150,000 this year. If an organisation out there needs to reduce their overheads by £150,000, they'll be looking at your profile thinking, this person's exactly what we're looking for. So I think it's that psyche and that mindset of problem solving and seeking out problems and then pitching yourself against them. And again, coming back to the statement of work and the fractional type work, that is the model that most people are taking forward, and that's where it's all moving. I think the fractional world is still kind of up and coming. It's still not really established properly, but I think more and more people are finding out ways of positioning themselves as really effective fractional consultants. But lots of these things are timing. So you've got to kind of, it really helps if you can get good at spotting timing. So, you know, an example would be organisations going through mass restructuring or redundancies. They will often need HR support, for example. So if you're an HR person, everyone else is looking at that organisation thinking, well, they're not hiring, they're getting rid of people. But you as an HR person might be thinking, there's a potential client there. Similarly, if you read about an organisation needing financial turnaround or fundraising expertise, these are all signals and buying signs for you to get in touch with your particular offering. But the timing thing is especially prevalent for all of these organisations because that's a real levelling of the playing field. It's a bit like competing with someone like Amazon. You know, if someone comes to your front door with selling sponges, ordinarily you'd think, well, no, I get my sponges from Amazon because it's easier and quicker and I'll probably get a better deal. But if you happen to spill water just before someone steps up to your door, the convenience there is sometimes outweighing what they would have done already. So that's a ridiculous example, but you kind of get the point around timing. Sometimes you meet the market at exactly the right point, and it really, really helps, plays into your favour. And I think personal branding, again, lots of people kind of cringe and shudder when they think about personal branding. I think it's not for everyone, but personal branding for me is more to think about what kind of problems you're renowned for solving. And whether people are aware of what you do and who exactly is aware. So what people in your network are aware of what you do. Do you shout about it enough? Are you associated with any organisations who can help you or who can add to what you do? Sometimes I also encourage people to show their work. I think too often we're worried about giving away work for free, when actually in theory, none of the clients who could engage you would be able to enact or embed the work that you do. But they might be sold on you by seeing examples of what you've done. An example I saw recently actually was a really good consultant. I haven't met them, but I saw on LinkedIn that they post every week about various CEOs that they've helped as a kind of critical friend. So they do these case studies on LinkedIn where every week they say what the problem was, what the organisation was doing, how they helped, and then what happened afterwards. So it's a really kind of short, sharp example of what someone's done to build a bit of a body of work. So anything you can pull together in terms of case studies of clients you've worked with or testimonials, that's always really, really helpful for your personal brand. And if you don't know and you don't know where to start, ask people who know you or who have worked with you, because they'll often be very honest and they'll give you insight far quicker than you working it all out yourself.
I'd only just throw in that if anyone hasn't been to our third workshop in the series, which is all about, you know, your value added, we focus a lot more on, I guess, the detail of how you think about your value proposition. So if you haven't gone to that workshop yet, go to that workshop. And there's also a really good talk in the resources section, where it talks about, you know, tactics for marketing yourself as a fractional. So have a look at that. There's a guy called Gregor Young who did that talk for us, a workshop a couple of months ago. So you can go and watch that at your own time.
So next, I'm gonna really quickly talk about agencies, because I think sometimes it's slightly misleading what we do, and it's worth you all being aware of this, just because you can leverage this for your own intent. But effectively, our role in a nutshell is to gather as much job market knowledge and build as many relationships as we can in order to then sell our solutions to clients who will need it. So we spend all day having conversations, hunting for problems, trying to map our solutions onto those problems. Investigo is slightly different in the sense that instead of just having one recruitment brand, we actually have multiple brands within our group who all complement the work we do on the recruitment side. So like I said earlier, we have a consulting arm. So instead of just offering a certain person to fit a job shaped hole, we can also offer consulting solutions. We can also offer employee branding or training. So we can help clients in lots of different ways. So it's very good for someone like me when I talk to clients. I've got a bit of a suite of things I can offer them. But the relevance to you is that when we're talking to clients on your behalf, we're really well placed to articulate the value that you can bring. So when you're talking to a recruiter in future or someone you already know, you should see them as your potential external sales arm. They're effectively doing advocacy work for you in front of their clients. So anything you can do to illuminate them on the value you bring is going to be helpful because they can pass that on to their clients. It's always worth pointing out that agencies work for the clients, so the clients are the ones who pay us, and you should run a mile from any agency who ever tries to charge you for something to do with your CV or an application. But it's worth bearing in mind that that's a clear distinction. And in a job-like market, our priority as an agency will always be more to the client as opposed to the candidate. So you have to be quite tenacious to get yourself on the radar of especially very good recruiters who are all time poor. So it's worth being aware of that. We're not, agencies aren't employability agencies. They are set up to help the clients find people. They're not set up to help the people find clients. The best ones will help you do both, but it's just worth being aware of that because lots of the recruiter bashing that I see on LinkedIn, I think stems back to that slight misunderstanding. I think, there are lots. So there are lots like Investigo who cover lots of different markets. So at Investigo, we have big private sector teams, but we have public sector, central government, and then we have my third sector team. There are some which are specialists in these worlds. So people like Charity People, they're an example of an organisation that actually only looks at roles in the charity sector. Generally, it will come down to the consultant in these organisations. As long as the consultant is good, they should, in theory, be able to unlock lots of this knowledge for you. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head if there are any other specifically just for this sector. Charity People are probably the only one that come to mind. Most of the others are people like us who also have presence across all sorts of different markets. But an easy way to find them is that what you'll see is that when you see roles advertised online, whether it's on Indeed or LinkedIn, if there's an agency advertising that role, the chances are they operate in that market. And if you're seeing 3, 4, 5 roles that you're interested in advertised by one agency, you should absolutely try to make an introduction there. Yeah, I would say it definitely. It's a really good question actually, because I think traditionally people think we get a job and then we go, right, now that I've got a job, I'm going to go out to the market and see who's interested. When actually our job is that when a client comes to us with a role or with a consulting engagement, we already know who's going to be sent across. We already roughly know who we're going to put in front of them. So it's absolutely worth speaking to them before that. The added benefit will be that obviously most agencies, when they've got lots of work, they're very busy, so it's harder to get hold of them. So if you can build a relationship with them when you've both got some time to talk things through and explain the value of what you've done, that will set you up really well for future. And I think when you find a good consultant, I would always suggest being in touch with them every couple of months, even every 6 weeks, even if it's just to say, look, just so you know, I'm still looking, hope all's good with you, let me know if anything changes or anything comes up. Because we can never predict or promise when we're going to have something, but what we want to be able to do is to immediately know who we should put in front of the client the minute we know what the client wants. Really good question, and I think major players were one when I was in-house and I had to use agencies as a client. Major players were one that we did use, and I think they're quite big and established in that space. Realistically, as I said before, I think you're better off finding good consultants as opposed to agencies, because within every agency you'll have good and bad consultants, hopefully more good. But I think in defense of recruiters, I think most of them are really, really time poor. So every day they start work with the best of intentions and stuff just happens. You know,
True.
people don't turn up for interviews, clients don't call them back with feedback, so they can't pass that on. And people change their mind, or the client decides not to advertise a role at the last minute. So we're constantly reacting to human beings who are the most unpredictable creatures on earth. So I think there's a bit of that. But I think in terms of other agencies who specialise on creative work, that's never really been my sector. But my advice would be to find the agencies who are advertising the kinds of jobs you're looking for, and just to get on their radar. Realistically, if you're the perfect fit for something and you're keeping in touch, or you're putting yourself in front of these agencies, they should, in theory, get back to you, and they should do some of that heavy lifting for you. But it's hit and miss, because obviously these people, they're overseeing inboxes which are going into the hundreds every day. So it's it's not a perfect system by any means.
Yeah.
But in terms of the last bit, and the last thing I wanted to cover was more around the future of the jobs market and tips that I think are worthwhile sharing. I think something I talk to a lot of people about, particularly when they're job hunting, is about creating a resilient working profile. And what I mean by that is obviously not necessarily just mental resilience, but professional resilience. So the likelihood is that you'll be doing more than one or two different kinds of things for clients or employers in the future. So anyone who just sort of stays in their tiny vertical will suffer the consequences. You probably are already doing one or two different things anyway, because most people have to as part of their jobs. But it's worth being aware of, and it's worth getting comfortable with this idea of being really adaptable and versatile, because obviously there's more client utility there, and I think it protects you longer term. Naturally, what you'll also find is when you work, and you will have all had this in jobs, you'll get pulled into things that are slightly outside your remit or your job description. So even though you sign up to do X, you get pulled into Y every now and then. And what I've found is that people who are really good at, well, professionally very good, or good at finding work for themselves, their secret sauce is often right in the intersection of a few of the things they do really well. So it's almost like they add all their skills and experience together, and then the intersection is where they're really, really effective. It always reminds me of the example of the cartoonist who I think said he wasn't the funniest person or the best drawer, but he combined those two things, and actually it made him a really good cartoonist. So often it's the thing in the middle of two things that is most valuable. I think, as I said about brave starts earlier as well, I think communities are going to become more and more important. And what I've seen some people do really successfully is build their own pools of associates. So they've almost had this mini coalition of people that they work with who complement the skills they have. So I know lots of people in the market, one of whom might be, for example, a finance person, and they might work with a procurement person and an HR person. What this does is give you a bit of resilience, and it also gives you a bit more market surface area, a bit more exposure to opportunities. You're effectively working as your three-person coalition or entity, and you're passing work to each other in the best cases. AI and automation, like I said, I really didn't want to go into this too much, but I think it's worth really auditing your own work against what's still inherently valuable because you alone do it, and why your approach or your experience or your skills are particularly valuable and protected from AI. Another really, really helpful thing to do, I think, is to ask people who know you and have worked with you what you did for an organisation, how you're best used, what the value is that you bring. It's always a really interesting exercise, because people have blind spots about themselves that others won't have blind spots of. So they'll be able to tell you quite clearly what you've really brought value to. And start thinking about other avenues you can use to engage these organisations. So it might be your own networks, it might be recruiters, it could be back channels or new platforms, it could be events or community spaces like this. It could be online through advertising or social media, whatever it might be. But think about how you can use these different avenues to engage these organisations. Something I also always say is to listen to what the market wants, because it will tell you and it will give you hints, but sometimes we're too stubborn to see that. And I think I've come across so many consultants in the past who've had the best intentions of doing something over here, but when they go out to sell it, the market just wants to engage them for something over there. And that's not a bad thing at all, but it's worth listening to that and thinking about why that's the case and why people value that more or see you more as that kind of person as opposed to that kind of person. Um, I think something as well I'd advise is to avoid spamming or using these AI tools to mass apply to contact people, because from our point of view, certainly on the agency side, I always find it quite obvious, and you've probably seen examples of it too. And I always feel like it weakens your proposition as well. I always think of it like a spear. So if you have this spear that you just keep smashing into the wall, it's going to get blunter and blunter until it's completely useless. Whereas if you can focus on really sharpening it and using it when you need to, it will always be a useful tool. And I think finally, getting better at following and finding opportunities yourself, whether it's through the news or conversations you're having, I think that's really, really useful. So like I said earlier about redundancies, people might be needed, board issues might mean they've got governance problems, and financial difficulty might mean they need fundraising or financial turnaround type experience. So always get good at that. And I think there's a few things I was going to say in summary. I was saying to Lucy earlier, I really do empathise when people are looking for work, because it isn't easy. The systems that we have in place, they aren't always efficient. They don't always do what we need them to do. But I think in terms of this cohort and this organisation in particular, I think there's a real opportunity at the moment for people who have careers behind them and who have built skills and have a proven track record. I think there's a different problem facing young people today, which is how can I even go about building that? But I think people in this cohort, your problem will be slightly different. It'll be more about packaging up what you've done and what you want to do and getting that in front of clients. So I hope that was helpful. I think after this, obviously, I'll get Lucy to share my details. If you want to connect with me or ask questions outside this forum, I'm always really, really happy to do that. As you can probably tell, I'm really interested in this stuff, so I never find it a chore to give you my advice or tuppence. So I think the biggest difference I've noticed is that in the commercial sector, everything is obviously the bottom line. So that's a really good North Star. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's a really good North Star on what you should do as an organisation, what you should stop doing. It's very easy to follow that. The third sector isn't always so clear, and if you take fundraising aside, third sector organisations don't have a bottom line per se. They have a mission and they have strategic objectives and they have politics and fiefdoms and all sorts of other things. So I think the difference is that in the commercial world, you can always tell whether what you're doing is the right thing to do based on money and profitability, I guess. In the third sector, it's really unclear. So I think organisations are a lot more ambiguous and they require a lot more emotional intelligence, I would say. Yeah, it really is. I think maybe I'm sure there was a time when working for a charity was very easy, or you could come in at 10, have your cake, go off for lunch at 12, and then leave at 3. That just doesn't really happen anymore. All of these charities are under so much scrutiny. They've got so much accountability. There's more more pressure from the press and media. But also, I think they're often, because they're underfunded compared to a big commercial entity, they're having to do more with less. So it's effectively like trying to do maybe your current role with a hand tied behind your back. It's not always the case, but it's definitely, I've not come across many people who say, yeah, this is the walk in the park and, I've got my whole life back. I see quite the opposite. I see people struggling sometimes with the pressure. It's certainly not for everyone. I'd say at the moment fundraising is really big. I think HR has been really big for the last 4 or 5 years because obviously there have been huge restructure and redundancy programs. Finance has been quite a large part for obvious reasons, but also it's a cyclical regulatory role that they can't go without. And I think the other one is probably around technology, and that always makes people groan inside because they think, oh, I'm not an IT person or I'm not very techie, so that doesn't really apply to me. But actually, all of this technology and transformation around digital that all leads to lots of opportunities for other people to get involved. So whether it's someone who does copywriting or content writing to tell the story, or it's a communications person to outline what's going on. So I think there's lots of different strands, and they kind of wax and wane and go up and down with time. I think there are some agencies who obviously recruit for these roles, so some of them will be advertised through agencies. I think signing up to alerts on job pages for organisations that you know you'd like to work with, but also connecting with people within these organisations. So whether it's CEOs or chairs of the board, these people will know when trustees are time bound positions as well. So if you go to any chair of a board or a CEO of a charity, in theory they should know when they'll next be looking for a trustee, because people can only do certain terms. So it's probably the only role within an organisation where you can definitively say in April 2027 we'll be looking for 2 trustees. So for that reason, it's just a question of having conversations and trying to leverage relationships that way.